and an apology from the outset for those that attended the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission and Commonwealth Games webinar that was held November, December time. There is some repetition between what I said then and what I'm going to say now, and at risk of being called a one-trick pony here, my area is physical activity, and I'm interested in children's physical activity, and obviously COVID's had a big impact. So there is a little bit of repetition from what I've said before. So good morning to you, or good afternoon to you from a pretty foggy, misty Lisburn. What I'm going to try to cover in my slot is to have a look about why do children need physical activity and how much do they need? So what are the official guidelines? Where can they get that physical activity? And those two things, I think, will be a nice prelude to Gavin, because sport is one of the key areas where people get their physical activity, or for children in particular. And also the mental health benefits are some of the key benefits that they get from it. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the research, and we have different bits of research that tell us how active children are in Northern Ireland. Not all the research agrees, but it paints a similar picture. So we come to similar conclusions. And then I'm going to focus in on how has COVID affected children's activity. So there is emerging evidence, and by the day, we're seeing more and more research showing the impact worldwide of COVID on children's physical activity. And then, if I may, give some recommendations or some take-home messages for you, which I think will probably dovetail nicely into the two speakers that follow, and probably point towards some of the aims of Young Minds, which is to identify some of the research agenda that we might need going forward. So first of all, what are the health benefits of physical activity? And we all know, and it's well established, that if you're active throughout your life, you will live longer and you will have less disease, so morbidity and mortality. But that's pretty meaningless to a child, because they're not really worried much beyond the next week or the next year. They're not necessarily that worried about whether they live till 86 rather than 81, and whether they get this disease or that disease. It's too distal to what they're thinking now. So what does the evidence tell us about the immediate effects and the effects in the short term on children? Well, this lovely evidence review was done by the US when they were deciding on their latest set of guidelines. And I'd recommend it highly to you, because it has every piece of evidence on physical activity that you could imagine. It's a free PDF downloadable. It runs to 400 pages, but it's easily searchable. And I think no matter what you're looking at, be it depression, anxiety, whatever, you will find the key evidence and a summary of that evidence. So for children, we know that being physically active improves bone health. And if you don't do a lot of weight-bearing exercise during your childhood, you're already disadvantaged in terms of your bone health when aging kicks in and demineralization of the bone takes effect. We know that it improves cognitive function right throughout life. And this is particularly important for children in an age where cognitive function in school and concentration is important. It improves cardiovascular fitness, gives you a stronger heart and circulatory system, improves muscle fitness, gets your muscle mass activated, which is really important for maintaining weight. Weight has become a big issue for young people, and overweight and obesity is still on the rise in most countries in children. And then depression, anxiety, and mental health. So these are strong evidence-based benefits of physical activity. This isn't just me as an advocate of physical activity. These are well evidence-based through pretty good research studies. And so physical activity has physical, mental, and social benefits. And I guess another important aspect of this is the fact that if we want to establish a lifelong habit, then we need to start in childhood. And often I say to people, if you use the analogy of brushing your teeth, most of us have brushed our teeth today without even consciously thinking at it. It became habitual. It became something we did. Why? Because we've done it from a very young age, and it became entrained in some way in our normal routine. And so childhood's a particularly useful time to try to get habits for these lifelong effects. So if we want lifelong effects, we probably do have to start in childhood. And there is at least moderate evidence that physical activity tracks from childhood to adulthood. In other words, active children are more likely to become active adults. So what are the guidelines? Well, it doesn't really matter where you live in the world. The evidence base upon which we draw our guidelines is the same. And so not surprisingly, whether it's UK or Ireland or World Health Organization, we come up with largely the same pieces of guidance. And the current UK guidance by the 4 chief medical officers published in 2019 suggests that children need to do 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity. And those words are important, moderate to vigorous. So this is not the very light activity that we might do, you know, walking around the house, walking from room to room. This is moderate to vigorous, gets you warm, gets you breathing harder, gets your heart pumping, and that they should accumulate 60 minutes of that a day. And that's really not a target, but a threshold. They should get to that 60 minutes every day of the week if they want the optimum benefits. They should also do that vigorous bit. So that's the bit that you're out of breath, you can't talk, your heart's really pumping, you're getting very warm, stroke sweaty. And it's those kinds of activities that are more likely to strengthen muscle and bone. And you should include those at least 3 days a week. So these are the kind of sporting, jumping, repetitive type activities that should be part of the 60 minutes. And then finally, and this is a really more recent, really since about 2010, we've begun to recognize that even if you're active, sitting for prolonged periods is unhealthy. And so there are now guidelines, stronger and weaker in different countries. In the UK, we've gone for a kind of a pretty gentle, tame approach. I suspect this might change over time, to say that young people should minimize the amount of time spent sitting for extended periods. So even if they're active, they should also look at their sedentary time. And I know in some countries, they're actually saying that this should be limited, that no child should sit for more than 2 hours unless they're asleep, of course. So, but that would have major implications for the way we do schools, the way we do exams, the way we put children in a car seat, the way, et cetera, et cetera. But I think this is the direction of travel, because the emerging evidence is suggesting that even if you're active, remaining sedentary for prolonged periods of time is not healthy. So where do children get their physical activity? So that little infographic on the left is one which we developed in coordination with the chief medical officers, and it's really aimed at health professionals who want to try to explain the guidelines to children and their parents, and it's printable and downloadable in black and white and in color from the NHS website. The link is given there, and it helps to explain what we mean. So what are the benefits at the top? How much should you do in the center? And this sedentary message at the bottom to try to sit a bit less. Where do children get their physical activity from? Well, like all of us, they get it across 4 domains, and sometimes this is overlooked. Sometimes we focus in on one of the domains, when in actual fact, you can get your 60 minutes from all different domains. So in your personal transport, cycling and walking, taking public transport, skating and skidding. In school, PE, break times, after school sport, activity breaks in the classroom, or standing desks, as we're beginning to see incorporated in some classrooms. During your leisure and recreation, and this is the one that we do know about and the one that we tend to focus in on. So sport and going for a walk or a swim, dancing, those kind of extracurricular activities tend to be where our focus lies, but we shouldn't neglect the others. And at home, active play, walking the dog, chores, and stair climbing. And as a prelude to what I'm going to talk about when I come on to COVID, I've shaded those that will have been most impacted by COVID in yellow here. So this is really where children have had the opportunities to be active removed from their lives by the restrictions put in place by adults. So I think it's worthy of considering that really the big hitters in physical activity are school and recreation, and they've also been the most impacted by COVID restrictions. So first of all, how active pre-COVID? How active are children in Northern Ireland? Well, this is a nice study, which is the Millennium Cohort Study. So it's a study of children born 2000 and 2001. And I don't have any children in the study, but I happen to have twins who fit into this cohort. So I'm always very interested in the findings. It's a very wide-ranging study, and physical activity is just one narrow part of it. So these kids were sampled using this little red device that you see there. It's called an actigraph. The kids wear it around their waist. waist and they wear it for 7 days. And it objectively, and that's the crucial thing, it objectively measures. There's no lying goes on here. This is not a self-report. This is the measurement of actual movement. And they measure light, moderate, and vigorous physical activity. And then they say what proportion of the children meet the recommended 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous per day. And these are the findings, and they suggest that, I hate maps when they do that, but anyway, it suggests that we're a black spot here. 43.4% of our children at age 7, so less than half of our children at age 7 are reaching the physical activity guidelines from this millennium cohort. And I guess the picture gets a little bleaker because if you divide that into males and females, already, again, at age 7, there are considerable gaps between boys and girls, with girls already a lot less active and less than 40% of them meeting the guidelines. And I'm afraid that the message isn't good because generally physical activity declines over a lifetime. So if this is where we are in 7-year-olds, then we do have a challenge. We recently took part in an all-island sport and physical activity survey, which was across all counties in Ireland, and it was a school survey, and it was with over 6,000 children, 30% of them from Northern Ireland, and we surveyed children in their classroom in a representative sample of schools from P6 right through to year 14, involving 115 schools, primary and post-primary, and they were asked through a questionnaire to tell us the amount of physical activity they did in the last 7 days in each of those domains. When you add that physical activity up and you look at the intensity of the activities, then only 13% of children in Ireland were meeting the guidelines. Higher for primary school pupils with about 20%, lower for post-primary. The age-related decline is evident, and as I mentioned from the Millennium Cohort study, boys are more likely to be active than girls. There are loads of findings in this study, and several publications come of it, but one of the things that's really has come out strongly is that social support from family and friends were the predictors. So if you had good social support from family and friends, you were more likely to meet the guidelines. In Northern Ireland alone, we have a couple of other lovely studies, the Kids Life and Times survey, which was with P7s, and the Young People's Life and Times, which was with the older age group, the 16-year-olds. And this was self-report again, so this was a survey of pupils as to how much they did. And if we think that the guidelines say you should be active every day, then the bottom line of this table is the most relevant, because you will see that on 7 days of the week, we have relatively small proportions of children active every day. So not a promising picture that I'm painting. I was asked a little to mention our WISH trial. So we have a trial, a cross-border trial funded by Chiton through SEUPB, which is a school-based trial. It's a peer-led walking intervention. It's aimed at the girls, the adolescent girls, so the least active group of our school population. And we specifically aim it at those who aren't involved in competitive sport. So these are the least active, if you were to use the word disaffected, but turned off physical activity, would describe these girls. And we have a peer-led program where the older girls do walks in and around the school before break, before lunch, and before school, during break, and during lunchtime. And they get rewards for doing walks, and they try to accumulate walks during the day. Now, sad to say that COVID has interrupted this trial not once but twice. So this is the second school year that we've had to pause the trial because schools are closed, but we have a rescue plan. More about that at another stage. But what I am drawing upon is the baseline measures that we made. So we had these actigraphs on 281 of these low active adolescent girls across 9 schools. And if you look at the table, you will see that the amount of sedentary time is huge, 544 minutes of time spent sedentary. Down to the other end, the amount of vigorous time, 10 minutes a day. Now, when we add up the moderate to vigorous in days per week, or on each day of the week, then we see that only 9.8% of these girls meet the guidelines required to get all of those lovely health benefits I mentioned at the start. So I guess for us, this confirmed that this is a group in need of an intervention, and we are hopeful that next year, I should say it's a cross-border trial, so it's in both Republic of Ireland and it's mainly Derry, Donegal, and now we've expanded a little more from Annacavan, and we hope to get the trial up and running again uninterrupted during the final phase next year. So the story so far: physical activity, I hope I've explained, has physical and mental health benefits during childhood. These are not just distal benefits, which they will get later in life. They're not the promises of bread tomorrow. They are actual benefits right now. We know that lifelong activity brings those additional benefits, but these aren't really selling points for children, I don't think. A majority of children throughout the EU, UK, Ireland are insufficiently active. Physical activity decreases with age. There are a couple of important transitions where we get a big fall off, and that is the school transfer age, you know, when they move from primary to secondary, and then from leaving school and the older ages at school. And Gavin may talk a little more about that when he talks about sport. We know that girls are less active than boys at almost every age. So the gender gap starts early, much earlier than I think many of us had thought initially, till some of that Millennium Cohort work came out. We know that school PE and school and community sport contributes to physical activity in a big way. Really importantly, that it contributes to the guidelines, because the guidelines are that moderate to vigorous. So whilst those other activities are all great, it's more likely that you'll get your moderate to vigorous out of school PE and school and community sport. And we know that children who play sport, therefore, are much more likely to meet the guidelines. So second half or second bit of this: how has children's physical activity been affected during COVID? And I'm really drawing upon some of our own work, but also some studies from other international, because the one thing about this is this is a global pandemic. So we're getting rich research on how different countries have coped and the impact in different countries. So it's been very useful. So this is in Shanghai schools. Now, fortunately, they had already just done a survey in January prior to them having to lock down. And so they did the survey again with over 2,400 adolescents pre and post the pandemic. And I suppose the highlights of this for me, or lowlights, I guess, if we're being truthful, is that physical activity plummeted. It went from 540 minutes a week down to 105. Those who are meeting the guidelines plummeted from 60% down to 17%. So this is a country where physical activity was pretty high, and look at the drastic effect it has had. And I guess if we ask, what's the displacement here? What are these children doing instead of being active? Well, we have the hint of an answer there. They're spending more time on the screen, from 610 minutes up to 2,300 minutes. This is a lovely study from the UKK Institute in Tampere in Finland, where some colleagues had done this as part of a normal survey. So they were going out every 2 years anyway, and they were looking at the step counts across the day. So on the bottom axis, on the x-axis there, that's 6 a.m. right through till midnight. 23, 24 is 11 to 12 at night. And they sampled the step counts using a pedometer in years 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. And they had already done it in May 2018, and they did it again in May 2020 when they were in the middle of severe COVID restrictions. The dotted lines here represent 2018, male and female, darker being male, the lighter being female. So there, that's the normal, if you call it normal, that was the normal step count over the course of the day. The solid line represents the step count over the course of the day among the children during restrictions. And if we focus in on this bit, this is the school day. Yeah, sort of the 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. school day. And you'll see that removing children from school has a pretty significant impact on their levels of step count and their physical activity. Why? Because we're removing the journey to school. We're taking away the recess, the breaks where they would have gone into the playground. We're removing physical education. And after school, they no longer have their sport or physical activity, which they might have done on the school premises or might have been taken to a sports club in the afternoon or evening. This is a Canadian study. This wasn't with children, but with parents. It wasn't objectively measured, but it was a survey asking the children and the youth, what was the change in the behavior as a result of COVID? So this is asking parents to say how much time their kids spent pre and post COVID. So it was a kind of a retrospective, a recall survey. And I suppose for me, the two things worth highlighting is that outdoor play, outdoor sport, and time spent outdoors decreased. People were reporting that their children were doing a lot less of it. And the corollary is that they were spending a lot more time watching screens, family time, and sedentary behaviors, box sets, etc. Closer to home, this is a study by colleagues from Limerick who surveyed adolescents aged 12 to 18 from 6 schools. And again, they didn't have any data prior to this. They went in when the lockdown occurred and they did a survey. And interestingly, some interesting findings here, 50% of children did less, 30% did the same, and 20% did more. But for me, one of the most important findings of this study was those that were already low active were more negatively impacted. In other words, there are some kids that are into physical activity already. They don't need the coach, the encouragement, to remain active, and maybe having a bit more time meant they did a bit more. But the vulnerable ones, the ones that were already not meeting the guidelines, did even less. And I think that really kind of highlights the divide or the challenge that we have. Returning to our WISH trial, when we shut down, all us researchers came up with how are we going to pivot our research. I began to hate the word pivot, which simply meant, what are we going to do now that we can't go out and do the research the way it was intended? So we pivoted our research by taking the 281 participants that were in schools that we had data on, and then we followed them up with a questionnaire, the same questionnaire, and some interviews. Now, what I will warn you about before I give you the results is only 94 of these girls responded. And so I think there is potential that there is bias, that those that responded to a questionnaire about their physical activity when they were locked down at home are probably likely to be the ones that might be more interested or engaged, or for whom our intervention had begun to take some effect, because these were all low active at the very start. So no change overall in physical activity, a decline in health-related quality of life. Yeah, so we saw a significant change in what they were reporting in terms of their health-related quality of life, a loss in motivation for exercise. Some positives, they were trying new forms of physical activity with their families, mainly getting out and walking or trying things, dare I mention Joe Wicks, but they were trying things with their families, and that they were more confident in getting out in their community walking. Hopefully a bit of the, sorry, there's like, I have 5 adults living at home, working at home, and the Amazon never stops. Apologies. It's an increase in self-efficacy for walking. So to finish off with, what are my take-home messages for you before I hand over to Gavin? Sport is a significant contributor to children's physical activity, and we know that sport will be where a lot of the vigorous intensity and a good proportion of the moderate intensity will come from. School. And that includes physical education, getting to and from school, recess, and all of the incidental activity of moving around the school is a contributor to weekday physical activity. COVID lockdown reduces this, yeah? So all of a sudden, and it's like caging an animal. If you cage an animal, suddenly they're much less active than if you let an animal roam free. And so lockdown results in a massive decrease in step counts and the incidental activity in most children and most adolescents. And so if we're going to stop sporting activity during lockdown, we're exacerbating this reduction. And this is likely to have long-term impacts on health and, for me, future participation. I know I'm very involved in gymnastics. I'm a director in a National Centre for Gymnastics here in Lisburn. And between the first lockdown and the return, we lost kids. We reckon we lost 8% of our talented children who were already engaged in a talent program 3 and 4 times a week. About 8% of them went. We're now locked down again. I suspect we'll lose more. We already get massive dropout from sport. I can only assume that COVID is going to exacerbate that, and kids that might otherwise have stayed involved will no longer be involved. So my conclusions is that we need to be really careful. And I know we're careful about the decisions to close schools, and there's been great public debate about that. But when we do that, we should also be very careful about considering stopping sport, weighing the risks and the benefits, specifically for children. Yeah, I get it that we have to think about society, but we have to think about these children too. They generally don't get as COVID as severely. We know that outdoor transmission is very low. Outdoor non-contact sport is incredibly low. And so I think we need to give it really careful consideration. I'm not suggesting now is the time to open it, but when we're closing school, we need to think carefully about sport as well. And if we are going to stay closed, and that's looking a little bit likely, then we need to start considering innovative ways of promoting physical activity when school and sport are removed from children's lives. And there's some nice little emerging interventions that are getting some support. But we need to, I think that should be one of the research agenda when young minds are considering where to go. Thank you.
Wow, that was fantastic. Very, very good. Thank you. We've got lots of questions. I have lots of thoughts, lots of comments there. This is the simplest thing I'm telling people to do, is be active to protect their mental health right now. And this could have really lifelong implications for our young people. So some really clear messages that I'll be putting on Twitter straight away and taking to the Education Committee next week as well. So next we have Dr. Gavin Breslin, and Gavin's going to be going into sport in more detail now. So Gavin, you screen sharing there. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Can everybody see it okay?
Yeah, you're all set. Thank you.
Great stuff. Well, first of all, Siobhan, thanks very much, and Rhonda, for the invite to speak about some of the research we've been involved in at the university. So Marie's talked really about the physical activity benefits and the levels of physical activity. I thought I would do something slightly different in terms of looking at the role of sport, mental health in young people, and in particular, trying to really highlight some of the benefits of sport and physical activity to mental health. I also want to try and describe some of the evidence-based for mental health awareness programs. So sport is a massive entertainment industry as well, and it's a good way of trying to reach people, especially hard to reach young people in our societies who are involved in sport, but also those who aren't, who may be interested in the entertainment side. And finally, I'm very lucky to be involved with the British Psychological Society in the development of resources in around coronavirus. And as early as March, we started to develop resources for sport, where I led a group to provide advice for those getting back into sport after COVID. But also I was part of a group for occupational psychology, looking at employees and employees' well-being as well. So I thought I would share some of those resources with you at the end. Okay, so you heard from Marie the benefits of physical activity. There's also the benefits of sport. Sport is broader than the physical activity component. There's different definitions of sports. So something competitive, something repetitive, is partly structured as well. Physical activity is any skeletal movement at all that can be linked to health. So it's no surprise that perhaps sport also includes physical activity as well. So some of the studies that have been developed, a lot of cross-sectional work, but there are longitudinal studies as well that's linking the role of sport to psychological outcomes, or psychosocial health, or psychological well-being, or quality of life, mental health, mental illness as well. So there's a lot of terms that's been used across this discipline. So you can see some of the work that we've been involved in. We know that there's links between sport and physical, emotional, and psychosocial health. There's a 5-year study by Jewett in 2014, still ongoing. And you can see that involvement in sport in adolescence is a predictor of lower depression, lower perceived stress, and higher self-rated mental health in young adulthood. So there is a tracking there as well. Also, years participating in sport, again, by Dora et al., you can see supporting that sort of longitudinal effect as well. So the bottom was probably really interesting to me, and that is that the higher participation in sport is associated, and these authors talk about the small gains. So it's the perceptions of social competence. So being involved in team-based sports, maybe going to gymnastics like Marie was talking about, or maybe being involved in football or athletics. It's probably not just the movement that's involved, the mechanical movement that brings about perhaps changes in health or psychological well-being, but there's also the social interactions as well. So the friendships that's made, the identity formation that's there as well. So as we be involved in sport from an early age, it starts to maybe shape our relationships, who our friends are, and that can all have a positive effect. There's also research in around developing leadership type skills, interaction skills, communication skills as well. Okay, there's some studies that we've been involved in the school as well. And this is looking at the role of physical activity. This is a study I done with the Public Health Agency a number of years back. And I think it's quite interesting, and you can sort of see how this links in. We found that 24% of the children aged 9 to 11 actually met the guidelines. And then what we found is boys were more active than girls. But what's interesting about this is we dichotomize those meeting the guidelines and those not. And we start to see a profile emerging. Again, cross-sectional study. But you see children who are meeting these guidelines tend to be satisfied with themselves, feel more comfortable, perhaps are developing skills of resilience, achievement in terms of schoolwork, global self-esteem is higher, social acceptance, and again, this interaction with social support and peers as well comes across in that. And that's the kids screen measure that was used back in 2012. Now we've used that measure as we go forward, and we have some other data. We've actually a study coming out in the next few months, also using the kids screen measure across Ireland as well. Here's some of the interventions that we were involved in. So moving beyond the cross-sectional work, and we can add to these as well. There's quite a number of interventions that have been completed at Ulster University. And the interventions could be anything from stand behind a chair, start moving, to more, I guess, interventions that rely on a lot of interaction from the teacher, or interaction from perhaps an outreach officer that would come, like a sports science student or sports studies student from Ulster University going out and delivering a 12-week intervention in schools. And we're starting to find changes in psychological well-being as a result. So quality of life improvement, maybe some of those factors I've just discussed. We also had studies, and this is the Ruth Rafferty study, the SUCH study, and we start to see some benefits as well of reducing sedentary behaviour as well. A lot of these studies, like the Healthy Choices program, very evidence-based, very psychologically based. There's a theory of self-determination theory is used there, where we're trying to provide children with choices and give them a sense of autonomy in what they do, build on their competence and how they feel about themselves, being able to achieve those sort of tasks or the type of exercises. And of course, then also trying to have a social element to it as well, where they see their friends doing it and they get choice over doing it with their friends and stuff as well. We've worked in different groups, those with intellectual disability, and that was Ben Fitzpatrick's PhD, where we looked at the Duke of Edinburgh Award on trying to increase physical activity as well. We've got a further PhD, Teresa Green is working on, again, looking at peer mentoring and teaming up with those kids with intellectual disabilities, trying to increase walking. Probably one of the biggest programs I've been involved in is the Sport for Life program. There you can see Sport for Life in its different guises there as well. There's a legacy program in Sport for Life All Ireland. So this is a study that ended up with an intervention of over 7,000 kids being involved in it. And the early years, I think we started off in 2009, that we've seen an increase in physical activity, and we've seen an increase in psychological well-being as well. We've seen some changes in nutrition as well. And we were quite excited about that, but I guess there's something about this study as well. We learned so much about this and the publications from it. But we found actually when we upscaled it, when we got bigger in terms of going across the country and the delivery of the intervention, that sometimes with all good intentions, interventions that are theory-based and have all the components have worked before, when we did scale it up to the bigger sample of 4,000 kids the second time around, we done with 3,000 first and 4,000 later, we found in our sample that there was no increases in physical activity. So there's a lot of work and motivation about trying to change activity, and perhaps having people involved in leading sessions rather than letting especially kids try and get on with it. So it has to be led as well. Of course, that comes with resource and stuff as well. I thought I would put up this slide, and the reason why, and I was reviewing evidence in and around the benefits of exercise, so structured activity for reducing symptoms of mental illness. And what was quite interesting from the review that we've done is that there's a huge amount of development of consensus statements in the past few years. When you see that in the literature, you know then that people are starting to understand there's a body of literature there, and they're making some suggestions in and around how exercise could be effective for either the prevention or the treatment of different types of mental illnesses. Now, this is data and reviews from adults, and I still think there's still a lot of work to be done with young people, and in particular adolescents, in and around mental illness as well. So I think that's a gap in the literature. Just to sort of highlight some of the key studies here, and you can see the organizations are involved. So these are across continents, and you can also see at the European level as well of suggestions in and around mental illness. The study by Stubbs, the review by Stubbs, very definitely worth a read in terms of the detail. So we can see also the check rod, it also, there's over 1 million participants in that study. It's a cross-sectional study, but it shows you that if you're exercising regularly and meeting the guidelines, that you're more likely to have a positive mental health profile. And then we can see then the treatment of depression and maybe some psychotic disorders, as well as some evidence in and around depression, anxiety, less so in around schizophrenia, but there's an emerging piece of evidence around that. There's a meta-analysis there, not going into the details of the statistics there, but if there are effects from exercise, they tend to be either small or they're medium effects. And the medium effects and more convincing research seems to be around depression out of all the meta-analysis. These are some studies I've been involved in, again, mainly with adults, but again, we can look at the development of physical activity consultations, so working in small groups with people to try and get them more active, or working one-to-one with them, where we find some levels of distress being reduced as a result. The second study there, we work with a commercial weight loss program facilitator, and we increased the activity of the women in that program. And what we found is the profile of symptoms of depression and distress starting to decrease as a result, beyond just doing the commercial weight loss program on its own. And I also think there's something in around that as well, how you pair and the motivations for increasing physical activity, and maybe not linking it all the time to weight management as well, although it's an important part. We looked at financial incentives, again, physical activity promotion through financial incentives, and working with the theory of planned behavior. So we're working on attitudes, working on, I guess, social norms, trying to change behaviors of individuals. And very interesting in this one, we done if then do prompts. You know, what do you do when you feel that you are not active, or you're coming from work? What is the things you can do to be active? So if this happens, or a scenario in your environment happens, then you could put this in place. Probably the most recent ones on the far left-hand side of the screen, a really interesting study led by Claire McCartan and Gavin Breslin at Queen's University, where there's a great opportunity to work and looking at the development of co-production of, okay, we know that exercise is beneficial, but how do we work with people with severe mental illness or serious mental illness to try and get them active? Because a part of the illness, of course, is a lack of motivation to do maybe daily things, one of which could be exercise. So we have gone on and done a number of other projects in and around co-production, and we're working in a hospital with those with severe mental illness, and we're just about to develop some work in and around co-production in that setting as well. And we've just completed a review as well with one of the PhD students at Ulster. This is I guess a foreword from, I guess a sentence from the foreword from the chief medical officers. You might have seen this before. So if physical activity were a drug, we would refer to it as a miracle cure. then there's a great many illnesses it can prevent and help treat. So I think there is something with physical activity that we should actually keep promoting it. It's the evidence base is growing, and there's no doubt around the physical activity that it is beneficial. What I want to do now is shift slightly, and I want to shift to looking at sport and perhaps the benefits to it, but also there's a negative side as well. And what we're finding in the literature, really starting 2015, 2016, and as Bowman's work start to trigger some of this, and we've done a lot of work in Northern Ireland in around engagement. So the first thing, engage in physical activity, engage in sport, there's a beneficial effect, but also we have to be a wee bit wary of it as well. There's crossing the line, essentially, in terms of how much you can engage, and it can be problematic. So competitive sport, by its nature, according to Bowman, especially if it's not supported. So these are groups of people probably moving towards the elite side, who will have negative effects, mainly through injury. So remember, these are people involved in sport who perhaps their identity is really formed in sport. It's a part of who they are, their friendships, their relationships, and they see themselves in it for the long haul. And then if injury takes place, or there's a need for transition, or they're not supported, or they're cut from the team, or perhaps there's financial issues where they can't continue, then that can lead to some problems. There's also the case that it could be the win-at-all-cost model. So sometimes in the environments that sport, I guess, emphasizes that for some people, that can be hard to take at times as well. So it's trying to look at the environment of sport and making sure that is I guess, congruent with them. We completed a review. Now, this is a chapter review of the figures of sort of mental health issues or mental illness. And I guess the conclusion is that athletes are as likely as the general population of having mental illness. But we also know that under certain circumstances, like we just discussed, that it can be higher in those sort of groups. So this is a chapter we've written, and we try to summarize the different levels of the disorders. And you can see some, like the jockey study we've done, 57% professional jockeys showing some symptoms of depression. Equestrian sport as well, again, depression. The concussion then, or brain injury, then has an influence on that as well. So I think we have to keep that in mind in the environment of sport. And this led to, I guess, the development of a book project, and that was called Mental Health and Wellbeing Interventions in Sport. We're trying to look at a collection of interventions that can be used to try and bring about awareness of mental health in sport. Now, very difficult sometimes to go in and talk about essentially weakness to people who are trying to demonstrate that they're very tough, because in sport, try not to give up, try not to give in to your coach about any issues that are troubling you, and perhaps risking non-selection or can be problematic. So we developed this book, and there's two sections in it. The first section was really looking at mental health awareness programs for athletes and coaches to try and make them more aware of their mental health and how they can seek help and support and self-manage. And also section 2, where this is the whole industry of sport, of using sport as a way of trying to engage other groups of people, so as well in mental health awareness and self-management messages. I know I haven't got much time to go through all of these sort of interventions, but within the first section of the book, we had programs like the State of Mind program that was delivered to athletes, both at our university and other universities as well, and across the UK through Sport Ed, to try and increase awareness around mental health and mental illness, and looking for the signs and how they can support people. The rational emotive behavioral therapy, this is Martin Turner's work. So again, using some ways of cognitive reframing and around how people can perceive how they're being treated within sport as well. On the far left-hand side, we had the Mood Matters program. So this is a program developed along with the Public Health Agency, and that was with Aware and Mindwise. We delivered programs across Northern Ireland as well, where we raising awareness of mental health. The TOPS program is a program based at Las Vegas in Nevada. So this is the program that has most evidence in around randomized controlled trial evidence in around for its effectiveness, and working with athletes in their development. And there's a group in Australia working on the Head of the Game program as well. So there's a lot of mental health awareness type programs in sport being developed. I have to say, we've done a systematic review in this, and the evidence base and the theoretical base for a lot of programs was non-existent. So we wanted to demonstrate some that did have an evidence and theoretical base. Section 2 of the book, again, was trying to look at the awareness programs using sport to try and engage people. There's a program called Tackling the Blues. This is through Everton and Andy Smith's work in England, where he tries to use, well, he does use the power of sport and entertainment to try and bring in young men in terms of discussions around mental health issues. We've used a state of mind to do that. We've also used the state of mind in prisons in England as well in some of our research work. So really hard to engage groups sometimes in and around self-help, and we find some success with that in our own research. We've worked with Hyde as well in terms of rugby-based programs to increase awareness around mental health, and there's some other programs as well in cell workouts that can be used to engage, again, prisoners in mental health. These are some of the outcomes from the State of Mind Ireland program. So increasing mental health awareness, knowledge of psychological disorders, self-management, increased willingness to support others, look out for others, and it depends on the program we deliver. We have several versions of the State of Mind Ireland program. One we included levels of mindfulness in there as well, and we found that increased as well. So there's some success from that. It was a study supported by the Public Health Agency. I thought I'd not go into detail, but would share some of the studies in terms of the research articles and the write-up of the State of Mind Ireland programs, the Matters in Sport programs that you can have a look at after this event as well. So you can sort of see that there is an evidence base again. Probably what I'm most proud of, actually, is during the development of those sort of programs. I think back in 2015, I was contacted by Sport Northern Ireland, and there was advice in around, or they wanted advice essentially in around how we could support athletes and those engaged in sport, so not just at the elite end. So athletes engaged in sport or anybody involved in club sport, how we could support their mental health. And there's a couple of examples of real terrible examples of traumatic experiences in clubs that somebody perhaps took their own life or perhaps was struggling with depression and didn't know how to seek support. And the club owners or leaders or managers were coming to looking for advice. So I was asked to give some sport and exercise psychology advice to what we could do. And when I looked at the evidence back in 2015, there's very little evidence at all about what the best way of trying to support within sport settings, given the culture of sport, and especially if there's a win at all costs sort of view in some clubs, especially for the most competitive teams. So we pulled together a group of like-minded people who wanted to do something positive. And what we thought would be 6 months actually took several years, which led to a systematic review, some intervention work, and a public consultation that then finally, and we thought would have been published in 2018, but wasn't able because of the lack of Stormont executive in place. But there was a launch of the action plan that is evidence-based and co-authored by Paul Donnelly and myself. So the plan is to improve mental health and well-being for people involved in sport in Northern Ireland. So not just at the high end of sport. And you can see a lot of the contributors to that working group that developed that document. It's a very live document. You can see that there's a 6-year action plan that has very clear outcomes as well. It was launched. It's got a number of ambassadors as well across the sporting community to try and engage people in that. on my way home from work, I was going to say, but works from home. But if you pass the Sport Northern Ireland, you'll see, I guess, their commitment to this wellbeing action plan, because they've blown it up the size of the building and put it on the side of it. So it's a good reminder, and I always have a smirk when I'm driving past it, thinking, okay, there's some good work being done in and around here. But I guess importantly, what does it include? It includes 15 action points across the 6 years. And here you can see some of them. So engage and support, identify and inspire, and you can see capacity and capability, and invest and implement. So across these 4 components, there's 15 action points to increase mental health awareness and self-management within sport, to try and make sure there's an evidence base for that, and try to improve and meet the vision of the program. So that's available online if you want to have a look at it. And again, the programming has began at the end of actually 2018, and the programs are very much alive out in clubs or online at the minute. This also led to, I guess, a reflection on the action plan and the development of a consensus statement. So when I was trying to put together this action plan, as psychologists, we use science. So I reviewed the literature. When I realized there wasn't much information available, we decided to create our own by the systematic reviews and the interventions. And then when I started to go across Europe, and I go across the States and ask people what they've been doing, then I realized that they couldn't draw on evidence either. So we decided that we would put a document together and come to some sort of consensus on how you would guide organizations at national level of how to approach mental health awareness programs. So within that document, there is a lot of advice in and around the development of mental health awareness programs, self-management programs, and how that could be implemented into policy and guidance. So there's over 10 countries involved in the development of this, and a huge number of organizations as well. Okay, I want to end with this slide. This, again, has been a work in progress, very busy during COVID time as well, of developing guidance, moving from research to try and get it into communities, because as much we can develop the research and we could keep it in books, or we could keep it in the university. I'm very, very much advocate of trying to get advice, easily accessible advice, and the British Psychological Society very much supported that as well. So the 2 pieces of advice for athletes during COVID-19 and supporting youth athletes during COVID-19. There's a lot of advice in around psychological advice about how parents can support their kids and the evidence base behind it. That's a group I led with the BPS. I was also part of the working group as well for trying to make working at home easier. So here's some other pieces of guidance, but I definitely recommend that you have a look at the British Psychological Society's website. There's some advice for professionals and some advice for the public as well. There's a document in the top right-hand side, and that's supporting young people at key points of transition. So training, learning, and work. So that sort of really ties into sort of the development. While working at the university, we're trying to work with people, with students, to build on their skills so they're ready for the workplace and how they can best do that. So during COVID, I think they're under a lot more pressure than ever, like the rest of us. So some advice in there can be helpful. That was picked up by Westminster and a few other big organizations as well. Okay, I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to listen, and hopefully you found that useful.
Thank you so much, Gavin. That was brilliant. One of the first things we did in this role, my office set up meetings with 3 sporting organisations in Northern Ireland, and they're all doing so much: Ulster GA, Ulster Rugby, and the IFA. So we're hoping to try and do more there. But you've really highlighted something very important in saying that, you know, sports people who engage in sports still have mental health problems, and they may be a wee bit different. So hopefully we can talk about the nature of that and what we can do there, and thinking about young people too, in our panel discussion. And some great chats happening that I've lost because I'm tweeting. Anyway, we're going to give you 10 minutes now just to get a wee comfort break and a cup of tea before we have our final presentation and our discussion. So I'm going to go for 10 minutes and come back, and we'll pause the recording during this time as well, if I can find the button. All right, we'll see you then about 1:15, everybody. Thank you.
Sure.
I'll start our recording again. I'm going to be speaking to us today about Gaird's Active Northern Ireland. And do you have a wee presentation for us there?
I do.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to find where our share screen. Here we go.
I hope everybody was getting some steps in and doing some, I did some jumping jacks down when I was waiting for my tea. So the messages are heading home.
You can see the slides okay?
That's perfect, Wendy. That's great. Okay, thank you.
Are you good to go? I'm just checking everybody's back okay and you're happy for me to start. Brill. That's great. Thank you. Thanks everybody. Real pleasure to be here and talk with you this afternoon, and really interesting to sort of hear the wider work that's going on, and obviously Marie and Gavin's contributions just before the break. I'm going to sort of hopefully build on you know, all of the fantastic insight and research that's been shared this morning, and talk to you a little bit about a piece of work that we've been undertaking in Northern Ireland, working in partnership since 2016, which concluded last year, and hopefully bring to life some of the challenges that have been highlighted through the research this morning. Before I do that, I'm just conscious that just to give you a little bit of information in terms of who the Youth Sport Trusts are, and the work that we do. So hopefully that puts that in the context of us as an organisation. So we're a UK charity, so we were established in 1995. So last year, of all years, we celebrated our 25th anniversary. And we're very much a charity that is focused on children and developing them as, you know, to be the best individuals that they can, but using the power of sport, physical activity and PE to really improve their life chances, both through improved well-being, healthier lifestyles and ultimately greater attainment. And you know, we feel we're very passionate about supporting children to become school ready, the wider promotion of inclusion and tolerance of young people, so they've got a real sense of belonging in the world. Our work reaches around 20,000 schools in the UK. We have obviously a significant base in England, but we do work in the home countries as well as working also internationally. The majority of our focus of our work is in schools, but we also do partner with community, and also increasingly, and particularly over this last year, working to support in the home as well. Just a little bit of an overview about us and our current strategy. So we have sort of 6 higher level objectives, and as you can see from those, they are very much identified to address the areas that we've kind of feel are most critical to improving those opportunities for young people. So transforming PE is very much about ensuring that the PE curriculum experience is fit for purpose for young people today, so that the challenges that they are experiencing in the 21st century, that they are equipped to deal with, and some of the things that have already been highlighted around mental health, pressures of social media, personal relationships, exam stress. We're using PE and sport as a real opportunity to support young people develop those critical skills and experiences and positive experiences to overcome those. So I'm not saying anything that you haven't already heard this morning in terms of, you know, what we feel as an organisation, that sport, play and physical activity are really key to tackling many of those challenges. Removing barriers to sport. So we know that many young people, particularly those from underrepresented groups, experience barriers to participation and therefore aren't able to access or experience the benefits that comes from sport. And we also, in terms of unlocking potential, you know, we believe strongly that the wider benefits that come from play and sport and physical activity, you know, really help those young people in terms of purpose, self-worth, their happiness, and that those in the most disadvantaged communities are further marginalised. So we've got an increasing focus on unlocking potential for young people in particularly disadvantaged communities. And the bottom three, I won't go into so much detail, but we have you know, had long delivered projects that very much focus on activism and leadership, and young people being very much integral to everything we do. And equally, insight being critical to the work that we do, and making decisions about the work that we undertake. So that's just a whistle-stop tour really in terms of those objectives of our current strategy. Last thing to say on that in terms of YST, and I will just talk a little bit more at the end about some of the wider pieces of work and programs that we do that kind of you know, sit underneath our programs. So we sort of probably about 40 to 50 different programs that we do provide for schools and young people. But you know, increasingly for us, what's really important is in delivering those programs, really understanding and being really focused on the measures of success in terms of delivering those programs. So for us, through our strategy for the next couple of years, particularly going to have a heightened focus on happiness, health and disadvantage, to ensure that we are really tailoring our support to those that are you know, most marginalised, most needed, and that, you know, for the young people, that they are having the most positive experience. So on to Girls Active. Girls Active was, as an organisation, we have been working to develop interventions really since our beginning in 1995 to really address the participation gaps between girls and boys, and obviously target, you know, a range of interventions to a range of different needs. But the disparity between girls and boys participation, as Marie highlighted this morning, has you know, increasingly been so, and also the fact that obviously that declines with age as well, and the gap becomes further between boys and girls. So we've always had a range of interventions to support schools in terms of that. But back in 2013, with our national data in England being collected through an annual survey, we looked at that and really began to ask some questions about why are we still experiencing this and what can we do further. And at that point, we sought to undertake a 2-year research and innovation project to really get underneath what the issues were, what the experiences were for, you know, both a broad range of teachers, parents, young people themselves, what was good practice. So it included sort of desk research as well as focus groups, and really understanding what good practice was out there, but to really kind of consider a holistic view on what we could do differently. And I think probably the kind of really two critical parts that points that came out really for us were that, you know, in a lot of instances, the PE and school sport experience that many girls experience just isn't relevant to them, and that actually as a result of that process and their experience in PE and sport, many were in fact being put off participation, you know, throughout their teenage years and to later in life. And that too often girls felt that PE met the needs of girls, you know, sporty girls that were already engaged. And for us, you know, therefore, again, highlighting that PE and sport experience is really the critical opportunity for us to really engage. What could we do further that really sought to, you know, engage more girls and ensure that it just wasn't meeting the needs of those girls that are already engaged. So as a result of that research and pilot, we developed a framework that I'll talk you through in a little bit more detail about Girls Active before talking about the impact within Northern Ireland. But very much Girls Active seeks to develop partnerships between teachers and girls so that they really understand and really engage fully in PE. So really seeking to consult with girls, to use insight, to really understand the things that are an issue for girls, the things that stop them participating, the things that they dislike, as well as obviously the things that they would like to do. So that whole process is very much insight driven, and it's all very much about a collaboration between teachers and girls working together. And then recognising that girls are hugely influenced by their peers and by their friends. So, and I think historically we've tended to kind of to consider that, you know, young people that aren't engaged see them as part of the problem, and actually in this scenario we're very much trying to consider that actually girls are part of the solution to this, and that working with them in a collaborative way through co-creation, through consultation and through girls leading is a really positive way to engage girls. And that really is the kind of the underlying approach that we take. Having a daughter myself who's 11, you know, I know that actually she will opt in or opt out of something very much influenced by her friends and likewise her peers as well. So in terms of the support for the programme, teachers will have received professional development, so an ongoing professional development to really help them understand those underlying principles and the approach that we're taking, and to support them to then develop that approach within their own schools. Girls will then be identified as potential leaders, and I'll talk about who they might be. But essentially we provide, in Northern Ireland, we've provided an inspiration day to those girls to really help them in their leadership role and the role that they'll undertake working with the teacher. The teachers and girls receive resources to support them in their work. And as I said before, critically, each school will undertake a survey so they can understand what the motivations of girls are, what the barriers are, in order to then put in place effective change. And interestingly, I just had a quick glance at the sort of the national report from Northern Ireland that concluded with about 1,000 girls completing this in the academic year 2019-20. The motivations for girls to participate, 66% wanted the top three motivations were 66% was about to have fun. That was why they wanted to participate. 62% to be healthy, and 58% was to spend time with friends. So we know those are the things that are really critical to girls, and for schools it's really about understanding what that looks like for their own students, and really then aiming to create an environment that builds on that. Equally, we asked obviously about the barriers as well. 36% of girls say that when they have their period, that's a barrier to their participation. They probably feel more conscious. They maybe don't feel as well. Maybe their motivation isn't as high. 29% are not confident, and 27% don't like other people watching them. So they feel very on show. They feel, and PE sport is obviously a subject or an activity where it's very apparent if you can execute a skill, and if you are perceived as good or not. So that kind of really builds on kind of girls that perhaps if they're not confident in themselves, or they don't perceive that they're good, that they're going to have those inhibitions. So the programme, Girls Active has an approach that really looks at supporting schools with 6 effective principles of practice. So these were the things that consistently through the research we found were really critical to having that improved engagement and relationship and impact on participation. And I think it's probably obviously important to say really what we're trying to do through this programme is increase girls' participation. However, we know that one of, as has already been highlighted, one of the huge knock-on impacts of that is around well-being and obviously the positive impact that it can have on mental health and well-being. So whilst this isn't specifically targeted to develop mental health and well-being, it is very much there to address participation. We know that that is an outcome of that. But these are the 6 things that underpin the programme and that we encourage schools to really consider in the actions and the work that they're taking and implementing the programme. And I think the first is really critical. Often we, in terms of engaging with schools will see consider something a project, and whilst this is a programme, we're very much, schools that enter into the process, we're very much encouraging them to think about how they embed this process within the conversations within schools. So not just seeing it as an exercise where they might do this process once. With girls, it's a continual cycle that they would look to embed within their practice, within their pedagogy, and to really make it a priority within the department. Schools come to us with the awareness that girls aren't engaged, that they don't have the necessarily all girls enjoying PE, they may have non-participants. So this is about really considering what things do we need to put in place as a department and as a school to really make that shift change and change the culture within our school. Putting self-confidence at the heart. So obviously we've already highlighted that girls' confidence is lower than boys, and particularly that declines with age, it declines with adolescence and puberty as well. So they're therefore really having a focus on how through the subject we can build confidence of girls to have a go, and whether that's through the delivery and the pedagogy of the lessons and PE. So really having a focus on personal improvement, personal goals, self-improvement, mastery, different variety. Some of the things that schools often tell us is, or girls often tell us is, girls that have already been good in primary school, they don't feel that they can kind of, they know they're already good and there's already that gap. And some of our biggest improvements, I think, or most positive experience are where schools have introduced other activities and girls feel that actually they're starting at that level point. So really having a think about actually is as a school, is our curriculum designed to build confidence, and how do we articulate that to girls? Already talked about girls not feeling that PE and sport is relevant to their lives. So increasingly our research shows that girls understand the importance, in fact all young people understand the importance of being active, but that doesn't translate into being active regularly enough, as Marie highlighted this morning. So really trying to help girls understand, what's the purpose of PE? Is it about sport, or is it about being physically educated and really helping them, and how that can help them in life, whether that's with managing stress, developing resilience, improved communication. So having that focus on wider skills developed through PE, not just the physical skills. So, those life skills being really critical. Also talked a little bit already about girls and their friendships. Girls are hugely influential with their peers. So we very much through Girls Active encourage girls, schools to think about girls and how they can use them in a positive way to influence their peers. So using girls in a leadership role, and girls that aren't necessarily the girls that are already engaged. We've had lots of success with having sports leaders, but they tend to historically have been girls that lead young people that are already engaged in sport and are wanting to lead because they are good. This is very much about working with a group of girls that might be on the periphery or maybe not enjoying their PE and sport experience, to really engage them, ask their opinions, and to really kind of use them in that process to create and shape and deliver opportunities to their friends. Role models, we know how influential role models are, and we really get the school to reflect on both within their own school, within their community, but also more widely, who are the role models for girls? So through this, we're aiming to obviously develop girls as leaders and role models themselves, but actually who are influential within their school community, not just the PE teacher. And again, I can talk a little bit more about that later. And through that whole process, we're really aiming to empower girls to really be key contributors to the design and delivery of PE and sport within their school. So those are the 6 underlying principles of the programme, and the programme is delivered very flexibly, but this is the kind of process that we encourage schools to kind of follow, and to very much view that as a cyclical process. So working, you know, the school's process and the girls' process hand in glove, very much to review their provisions. So there's a self-review tool for the schools. Really to, at the same point in time, as I said, that they will look to identify a girls' leadership and marketing group. So that's a group of girls who they identify, and that might be through talking through an assembly to girls about what they want to do and why we're doing this, and getting girls to apply. It might be some targeting of girls that are particularly influential or have great ideas. The Girls Leadership and Marketing Group, or GLAMS group, as an acronym, is really there to be that sort of conduit between their peers and to work closely with the teacher. Establishing motivation, so we've already talked about having an insight survey, understanding kind of the things that are barriers for girls and what the motivations are, and then creating an action plan to really underpin how they can go about what changes they want to put in place, and what that will look like and how they will go about doing that. A focus on developing brand, and I think this is probably something that we have done very differently from previous interventions. Really, the way in which we would market PE as teachers. I look back to kind of my teaching years, and if I was running an extracurricular club, how would I promote it to girls? And actually, you know, I'm thinking about it now, girls are far more tech savvy, far more in touch, and able to kind of really market and develop something that's going to be relevant and exciting for their friends, and you know, isn't necessarily, is going to tap into what those girls' motivations are. So whether that is fun, friendship, you know, having a social environment, to then really sell those opportunities, engage more girls more widely. So that's kind of a bit of an overview of the programme. I'll just talk through a little bit of the detail in terms of what that looks like within Northern Ireland. So as I said, we started delivering Girls Active in Northern Ireland in 2016. And across that time through until the end of last academic year, we engaged 33 schools during that time, so that's the little green dots. As part of that, we also delivered some wider engagement and opportunity. So it's just a visual representation, but predominantly the Girls Active work focused on ABC Council and Lisbon Castleraine City Council as well. And the programme during that time was funded from Sports Northern Ireland. Great to see Anne Carrad on the call this morning, this afternoon as well, and received funding via the Department for Communities as part of the Active Fit and Sporty project. So geographically, and that's kind of the reach and engagement of the programme. And just a little bit about numbers in terms of what we did in that time. So each of those schools that were engaged, the 33 schools, they will have identified a number of Girls Active leaders that obviously then were trained. And we provided schools with an inspiration day. So that was designed to develop them both in their leadership role, but also to give them some you know, some inspiration in terms of activity ideas. So during that time, they would have very much focused on developing those leadership skills, understanding how they may go about communicating with other girls, thinking about what the barriers were for school, you know, for girls, some action planning around what they might potentially be able to do. So very much that being led by the girls, you know, to get their input, really develop their ideas, and then to work at a later point in time with their teachers. So those Girls Active leaders then sought to engage girls within their own school in the range of intervention. So you can see there the top figure, over that time 11,000 girls were engaged through the Girls Active programme. Now that may have been through extracurricular, it may have been through sort of targeted interventions, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that schools did. I'll also share with Rhonda as well the evaluation, final evaluation report, and there's lots of case studies and examples in there as well if you wanted further information. We also obviously very much try to encourage schools to think about targeting those most disadvantaged and those that were, perhaps already, not participating. So particularly girls from Black and ethnic minority community groups, girls with special educational needs as well, because we know that those girls with additional protected characteristics are likely to be further marginalised from participation. And as I said, over that time, a number of professional development opportunities. Just a quick one on students from the university. We also work really closely with Ulster University, and again, great to see Tandy joining us as well. And when we ran the inspiration days for the Girls Active Leaders, the university students from the university were involved as mentors on the day to support the girls with the tasks and the sort of activities that they were undertaking. So there's a real kind of process there where we've got kind of, we're modelling, the influence that peers can have and girls can have as other role models. So in terms of impact during that time, obviously the numbers is great, but we also kind of wanted to just wanted to highlight sort of 4 areas that the programme has really focused on. So girls obviously as participants, so how has Girls Active really sought to engage more girls to become more active, and what was the impact of that? So this is just a quick summary. As I said, there is a full evaluation report as well that kind of brings that to life with a lot more detail. But these are the key things that through the evaluations were evident to us, both through case studies and feedback from teachers, observations as well. So very much absolutely the type of girls that were being targeted were those that perhaps were lower in terms of participation. Certainly, increased confidence for girls to really come into a space and try a new activity or go to a club when previously they hadn't, or engage in PE when they hadn't previously bought kit. Really shows kind of an increased attitude and increased confidence, as well as really seeing relevance. So you can just see, obviously, with some of the quotes that I've included there, some of those wider aspects. Behaviour and attainment, absolutely, we definitely see a kind of a knock-on effect in terms of the impact that sort of girls feeling engaged and consulted with and valued has had. Teachers continually report to us that, actually how it's improved the relationship that they had with girls, how girls see the subject, and that they just don't, I think too often teachers tell us that, actually PE is just sort of seen as this subject that's down the end of the corridor and, is somewhere where they go when the kids need to let off steam. This is really sort of highlighted, I think, to many of the girls, really trying to understand their own reasons to be active and what that means to them, and that can be very different from, from their friend who may have a completely different reason to be active. So there's a real sort of drive to really help young people and girls in this instance understand why it's important and why it might be relevant for them and what that looks like. Up on the right.
So sorry for interrupting. We're going a wee bit over time, so we want.
No problem.
We just want to leave a little time for discussion. So I don't know how many slides you have left, but maybe if you could try and wind it up in a couple.
Yeah.
Sorry, because it's great. It's so.
No, it's fine. It's absolutely fine.
Time for chatting. Okay, thank you.
I'll be very quick. So moving on, impact on girls as leaders. So the kind of wider impact that girls having that role, in terms of teachers really being amazed by, the girls' leadership skills and the ideas that they've had and the impact that it's had on girls. And again, I'll leave those and move on quite quickly as well. Impact on teachers, I think it's been really interesting. I think the feedback from teachers, many of whom haven't had an awful lot of CPD, and I think it's kind of equipped them more to become advocates of their subject and really to take a sort of renewed look at the curriculum and how they can really you know, shine a different lens on that to really engage more young people. I'll move on again. And then just in terms of the wider work really that's gone on, we've kind of obviously worked quite closely with schools, but also that's had a knock-on effect both in terms of the work that schools have done locally, both in terms of engaging clubs in the communities, working closer across schools, raising the profile of PE within their school, and girls feeling valued as well by the fact that, you know, girls PE has a higher profile. Just wanted to finish very quickly, last slide, just on some wider work that we are doing in terms of wellbeing and mental health and wellbeing. So the first is World Schools. It's working in partnership with the Bupa Foundation. It's a free community of practice that schools can sign up for. And it's got a real focus on 3 areas, really about wellbeing of teachers and ensuring that they're equipped, that young people are well prepared, and that they're equipped for life. I won't talk too much detail, but obviously there's information on the website. There's also a range of programs that we've got that are targeted specifically to support physical activity and also equip young people in terms of health and well-being. And they're just listed there. And that's it. Sorry for overrunning.
You're fine. That's grand. What a brilliant presentation, and what a really, really important work that you're doing for girls, for young people. It's absolutely vital. So it's great to have the research and then kind of translated into a program that's evidence-based and that really targets the groups that are most in need. So that's brilliant. We have a load of questions, and it's really hard to know where to start. We also have an offer on Twitter of Paddy Barnes to do a boxing class for all the schools in Northern Ireland, which is fab. So we're going to try and get that to the office to make that happen. Involving those role models is probably a really good idea, getting key sports people from Northern Ireland, from all different types of sports to lead this stuff. We know that works as well. So in terms of, can we just get a wee bit from each of our presenters then on what you would be recommending to me as mental health champion for Northern Ireland as we emerge from this pandemic? You know, thinking of each of your areas, that might be a good way to start. What should I be recommending to the government that we do right now and then in the future in terms of promoting mental health and wellbeing through sport and physical activity? Let's start with you, Marie.
Okay, so right now, the COVID bit of this is that we need to find ways of engaging people in physical activity while they can't be at school or wherever else they would have gotten their sport, clubs and stuff. And I think we should capitalize on the fact it's the first time in my lifetime that I've heard prime ministers saying, leave the house to exercise. Wow. If I had asked for that for the last 20 years, we wouldn't have got it. And we've got Leo Varadkar, we've Micheál Martin, we've had Boris Johnson, we've Nicola Sturgeon saying, you can leave the house to exercise. We got to capitalize. It's a once in a lifetime chance. The after COVID, I think we've really got to think carefully about all the places you get physical activity and then the motivation behind it. And without a doubt, the mood lifting, enjoyment, I feel good after it is a selling point that we've often missed. We've often focused, including myself, on the health benefits, the distal health, and we've got to talk about the here and now, how it makes you feel. Doesn't it make you feel great? Try it and you'll like it. And if we can get that message across, I think we'll engage people who aren't interested in less heart attacks later and aren't interested in competitive sport now. They're interested in feeling good, happiness.
Mm-hmm. And it works for kids as well. If we tell kids they'll feel better. Yeah, because they know that they're anxious and they know they're not feeling good at the minute. So it's tangible, it's real. Right, let's go, Gavin. Have you any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, definitely. Some of the examples that Marie and suggestions Marie said, I think there's a broad public health message that we have to sort of address during COVID. And it is trying to get people out within the regulations and safely as well. Something that struck me from Marie's talk was in around sport and the engagement of it. That's the bit that has been taken away. So there's the bodily piece of moving, mechanically piece of getting the benefits, but the psychological benefits are mainly through interactions with people. And I don't know, there's enough evidence really seeing if we move something, services or something online, whether people still get the same benefit from that. I think there is some benefits of interacting online, but it's not the same. So there has to be some sort of a hybrid sort of model there of helping people.
Yeah, that's a good point, Gavin. I got up early one morning to do a workout with a few other people, though we were all doing stuff at the same time, and it was for men's mental health. But it was really lovely to have that connection, to think that other people were up in the middle of the night doing this. And it was a really, really special thing to have that connection and feel that you're doing sport with other people at the same time. So yeah. I think there's something in that we need to try and hold on to in terms of the benefit of sport. It's a connection as well as the actual physical activity part of it.
Yeah. So there is the encouragement of getting people active, but I think when people are involved and you tell them they can't do something, I think then that there is some outcomes that can be negative. So the quality of life might decrease. People aren't running with the people they used to run with before, or walking with the people they walked with before, because of households not being able to mix and stuff. So there's issues around that needs resolved.
Great. Okay, fantastic response. Wendy, do you have any thoughts in terms of that? What would your advice be to me in terms of advising government around this area?
I think certainly it's for us, particularly having gone through this, very unique time, it's really about the importance of how we're equipping young people, to overcome, the challenges going, both going, ordinarily through life, in terms of adolescence and into adulthood, the contribution that being physically active does, gives to kind of really developing them and equipping them, and that those that are most marginalised are really the ones that are being further disadvantaged at every stage. And I think the more that we can help groups understand the motivation, their own motivations and the benefits, as opposed to us telling them, it's really helping them go through that kind of behaviour, that behaviour change. And I think it was really interesting. I was reading some research that one of the universities in England had done, again, on girls in lockdown. And I think one of the kind of critical things that they fed back was that because physical activity and that message about being able to be, that was one of the things that they were allowed to do, they felt that really resonated, and they therefore placed more importance on it. So, really kind of, I guess, really how do we tap in to that and ensure that government can continually give those strong messages, almost how critical that is.
Brilliant, fantastic. And I also think the models of psychology can be used to help with all of this stuff as well. I mean, there was a programme last week on BBC led by Tanya Byron where they talked about the COM-B model, and they had about mental health. It was brilliant anyway, but one of the interventions they showed was a physical activity intervention where they used a psychological model to help people break down, their motivations, their opportunities, their capabilities, and really target those. And I think it's those sorts of programs that we need, and actually we need to be doing them through social prescribing as well in the community, and that's what I want to see in the mental health strategy, hopefully, is like a social prescribing program for sports-based activity in young people particularly, but in all age groups, because it's so important.
One more thing, I guess I'd just add to that. I think being that, PE is that one, statutory entitlement where every young person will access that experience. So, that is so important that we get that right, so that all young people have that really positive experience, and so that they can really look beyond that and see the value of why being active, beyond school is important. And if they have a poor experience, as we know, from many teachers we work with, in the primary setting, for example, they've had a poor PE experience themselves, don't have the confidence to deliver the subject, and it's, it has that cycle. So really trying to help, both practitioners, but also ensuring that experience is the best it can be.
Siobhan, I think in around the models of psychology, you're absolutely right, that we need to be encouraging policymakers to have a look at those. And I think maybe it's a fault from a psychology point of view of sometimes using the language in it that's off-putting. So I know that the British Psychological Society, you're probably aware of this as well, that the Health Psychology Group developed resources in around the COM-B that sort of breaks it down and makes it a lot easier to use and apply to things like physical activity, sedentary behavior. I think there's a smoking cessation, and there's an alcohol-based one as well. So that I think there are attempts to try and simplify some of the language as psychologists sometimes we speak, which can be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Very, very good. Yeah, that's just making it accessible and and we know, I think from the pandemic as well, we know the importance of behavior change and all of this, the science of behavior change, you need to apply it. Marie.
Yeah, and interestingly, the author, one of the main authors of COM-B, has become the leading light in the independent sage, Susan Mickey. And because she's trying to change behavior around mask wearing and keeping social distance and washing hands. And so that model is really, really worth looking at. I know now in physical activity, it's the preeminent model for thinking about how we change physical activity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we've a lot of really good recommendations for websites, and I'm just using this to flag to Rhonda. If we could make a note of them and maybe put them up in the chat against our YouTube video when we're putting this up, so we have a load of resources.
Yes, definitely.
Would be great. Thank you. I'm trying to think.
I've also sorry, can I just come in on Gavin's point? You were talking about the language that psychologists use. As you know, Siobhan, we've been talking sort of for the past month about a living document, where we were going to look at the language that's used and try and break it down a little bit and put some resources and what in it, but that's a work in progress, as everything is. So
yeah, so that we can, for young people's mental.
I think the more public facing type documents and professional facing that we produce, that's simple language is, it's more likely to have more impact and be picked up by, I guess, others.
Marie's raised something here. This was a question I had around exercise addiction. Only one of the things that's happened during lockdown is there's been this huge increase. It is really big in referrals for eating disorders or disordered eating. And 1 in 6 children in Northern Ireland in that prevalence study before COVID had disordered eating. So I was just wondering about the link between that then and physical activity and, addiction and using physical activity as a way of emotional regulation that could actually get to a dangerous level or something. Do you want to just take us through that, Marie, just because as well,
Yeah, and I know exercise, I'm no eating disorder specialist at all, but as I understand it, exercise is just one of the tools. So the eating disorder comes largely from control, and have we ever been in a time in our lives where we had less control of everything in our lives? So being able to control is an important driver for some of the eating disorder stuff. And exercise is just one of the tools. So how do you change your body weight? Well, it's pretty good knowledge, although bizarrely the evidence isn't brilliant for exercise reducing weight. Yeah, there isn't brilliant evidence, but there is at least an accepted level of knowledge to suggest that you can reduce your weight in a couple of ways. One is by changing your diet, one is by exercise. So I don't think it's exercise that's fueling it. I think exercise is one of the things that people turn to when they have the eating disorder. Maybe that's me as an exercise enthusiast saying that. I don't know that there's any evidence that suggests exercise makes you anorexic. More likely that exercise is something that helps you. Not helps you. It's a tool that you use when you have an eating disorder. Or it's a mechanism you use if you have an eating disorder.
Yeah, it's a way of trying to control calories and expenditure of calories and all of that stuff, perhaps. Maybe we'll do a webinar on eating disorders and disordered eating and self-harm and those sort of really emotional regulation control type behaviors that young people engage in, behavioral stuff that can be associated with mental illness. That'd be good. Can we end? Yeah, let's add that to the list. I want to end with a research thing and also to highlight the Happiness Lab, which is just my favorite podcast ever, and it's just amazing. You should all listen to it. But they've got 2 really good ones that came out this January on diet and exercise, and exercising for the right reasons and getting the best benefits of it. And it's just those are beautiful podcasts anyway. So I would really recommend those. Now, before we go, we just want to talk about what are research priorities in terms of exercise, activity, mental health, and young people in Northern Ireland specifically even. So anybody want to start us off? Just again, one line from each of you, or a couple of lines from each of our
I'm going to start because I have to jump into another meeting, but for me, it's about we're still about finding the interventions that work. We don't know. And I think the problem is we've been too broad brush with this. We need to think what interventions work in what settings for what people. But I think we've got to stop making this an individual thing. People are inactive, not just because of individual choice, but because of social support, the environment, policy level. So we've got to look at that, what I call that whole socioeconomic framework. And for too long, we focused on changing individual behavior. If my street was pedestrianized, I wouldn't drive to Tesco, I'd walk, and I live walking distance from it. But because I'm allowed to drive, then I will drive. And I think we need a societal policy and environmental approach, top down, as well as an individual supportive approach. That's all from me.
Super. We talked to the Minister for Infrastructure about that, and we've already been talking about those things. So that's great, Marie. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Gavin, do you want to come in next?
Yeah, not the exercise piece. I think in terms of the mental health promotion and the mental health awareness type work, I think we've got a lot of young people, and we've done a survey I didn't talk about in my presentation about adolescents' attitudes to going and seeking help from GPs. And I think there is trust with GPs, but there's a group of adolescents who are probably more at risk, and they're less likely to be trusting of general practitioners, or actually beyond general practitioners, but like teachers and people who are in authority. So I think we can use sport as a way of trying to engage those people and bring them into a level of trust. And I think it was Oshin put it on the chat that we can develop trust. And if we can develop those sort of social networks in our communities, they're more likely to come forward. Sport, I think, is very appealing to some people, but I'm also going to put my hand up and say there's other things that may be more appealing, whether it's music, whether it's choir, whether it's whatever else, art. And I think we need to be very creative about how we can engage our young people. And that's why this group's very important. It's also why it's really important we get young people's voices, not my voice, young people's voices to actually say, look, this is what I would like to do, because when I'm not feeling well, that would work for me. You know, so it's trying to sort of see across, and the sport's one piece of it. So there's a big puzzle here, and to look after our young people, we have to find ways that would bring them in and ask questions.
Great, Gavin, thank you so much for that. Wendy, you've got the last word here. Have you got any research?
No pressure.
I'll wrap it up. But yeah, research questions, final messages for us based on your work and your experience.
Yeah, I think I think it's something obviously over in India as well, in terms of our kind of work in England around sort of young people and physical activity. It's a similar challenge for us, and I think what we are always trying to do is trying to encourage departments to join and to kind of have that holistic approach across departments, because I think very often trying to have separate conversations with different policymakers is really challenging. So having a joint and also cross-party commitments, and I think Marie summed it up perfectly in terms of then hopefully achieving those wider infrastructure changes, but also the targeted interventions to those that most need it.
Fantastic, very good. So that's us. We're only 3 minutes over. I'm getting better at this. I kind of a looser definition of time than most people. But thank you so much to everybody, to our presenters and our delegates. And we didn't get to hear anybody else's voices, but I thought it was important that we just keep getting the information from our presenters when we could. So we have another webinar coming soon. Is it the suicide and self-harm one, Rhonda? Is that what's next? Hello, Rhonda's gone.
Sorry, didn't get the button right there. Yes, suicide and self-harm is the next one. It's in about 2 weeks' time. But I'll be tweeting out the details of that. And that's, again, another packed programme and some really great presenters again. It's another one to look forward to.
So great. So tag us on social media and share all the stuff so that we can get all these messages out to as wide an audience as possible for free. And thank you again. Thank you for all the work you're doing. And please take care of yourselves, and we will get through this together. It's not easy. So self-care comes first as well. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Siobhan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.